Hello there and welcome. In this episode, we're going to continue working on the phishing system, and before we start with the minigame, we want to address a few issues from the previous episode. So first, let's open the phishing system. Inside the phishing system, we have our water source enum, and I just noticed that it's not spelled correctly, so let's rename it to water source. Then inside the phishing rod script, if we scroll down to this part that we actually cast our rod and we want to start with the phishing, we are providing it with a water source, but at this moment this is hard coded, so it will only use the lake. But what if we want to detect the actual water source and provide it over here without hard coding it? For this, we're going to create a new script. We're going to name it phishing area, and the only thing that we're going to have inside is a public water source. So this will be the water source of this phishing area. So now all we need to do is add our phishing area script to all of our water sources. In our case, we have this deep lake and we have this game object inside, and we also have this underwater effect, and all of them already have this phishing area tag, so we can detect them. But we also want to add this script on them, so we're simply going to drag this script over here, and we're going to set the water source to be lake. The same way over here, we can also add it this way, lake, and for the underwater effect, phishing area, lake. Now, if you had other water sources, for example, the ocean over here, or maybe some kind of river, then you would just add the same script and you would change it to river or ocean. And then we can take this and actually provide it to our method, and it will detect the water source and it will start to look for the fish that should be found inside of this water source. So inside the phishing rod script, we're simply going to scroll down to the update method, and over here, when we detect the water source using the raycast, we're going to take our hit collider, which is the object that we hit, and we're going to access the game object. We're going to get the phishing area script, and we're going to grab the water source. Then we're going to store it inside a water source, and we're going to provide it into this method as an argument. And the reason we store it inside is just because we don't want to take all of this and just place it over here. This way it's much cleaner. Then we're going to add this parameter, and if we go to the cast rod coroutine, we can see it over here, and now we simply pass it over here instead of hard coding the lake. And now it will work, and it will always detect the actual water source. And if we have only a lake, then it's going to detect the lake. But if we have multiple water sources, it's going to detect all of them, and we don't have to hard code it over here. The final issue that I want to deal with before we start with the minigame is inside the phishing system. If we scroll down to this end phishing method, we have this part over here that we are accessing the equip system to deselect and then select again our phishing rod model, and this is just to reset the way it is built. So instead of the rope being attached to the bait, we want to destroy the bait and we want to reset the position of the rope. But at the moment we're hard coding 1, which is the actual quick slot of our model, and this is just for debugging. But what if we don't know the quick slot? What if the rod will be in quick slot 5? We cannot just hard code it. So for this, we're going to do something very simple. We're going to access our equip system, and inside we have something called selected number, and this is the selected active slot at the moment. So we can simply take this and store it into some kind of slot, and then take the slot and pass it over here. So this way we're not hard coding it, but we're just getting the active slot. We're saving it because after we deselect it, this will no longer be the selected slot, but we have it saved over here. So we deselect and then select again, and it will simply do what we want without hard coding it. And let's also make it clear that all of this is for reset the fishing rod model. So now we want to finally start working on the minigame, and that's one of the biggest part of the fishing system. And this is just something that adds a bit of challenge to the fishing, because we don't want to let the player just cast his rod and then get the fish each time. We want to add some effort to it. And there are a lot of ways to do it, and each game does it differently. You can have some kind of 2D minigame, you can have a 3D. For example, you need to actually struggle with the fish and move around. So it really depends on your game. And of course, you can implement your own minigame over here if you don't like the one that I'm going to show you. So in our case, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to select our fishing system, and we're going to add a UI image. And this will just be the background, but we can also rename it to be minigame. Then we're going to double click on it and we're going to see it over here. So now we're simply going to change the scale a bit. We're going to make it wider, so about 600. And we want to add some kind of background. So we're going to select something. I have this blue sprite, and we use this sprite for our status bars, if you remember, for the hydration. So you can use this and it will give it some kind of nice background. Of course, you can make it much prettier. You can add some animated bubbles or something. It really depends on you. We're going to use this one. Then we also want to add some outlines. So we're going to use outline, but not the outline script that is meant to outline objects, but this one that comes with Unity. We're going to increase the X and Y, and we're going to make it less transparent, and we're going to add another one just so it looks better. So now we have this outline over here. Now we're going to select our minigame, and we're going to add a UI image, and we're going to name it fish. Then we're going to add another one, and we're going to name it catcher. So the idea is that we're going to have two objects inside that will basically create this minigame. So the fish will move inside of this bar, and it will have different speeds, it will have different frequencies, so it will change its direction randomly. And then we have the catcher, and this is something that the player will control, and all he needs to do is catch the fish and basically stay overlapping on this fish. And the more he is overlapping the fish, there will be some kind of bar over here that will fill up, and when the bar is completed, then the fish will be caught. But if the catcher is not overlapping the fish, then this bar will go down, and if it reaches 0, then we're going to fail the minigame. So this is something you can find in many other games. This is a very common fishing minigame, and let's start doing it. So first of all, we want to add some kind of sprite to the fish. I'm going to provide you a link with some free assets for fish icons. So if I go over here, I have these ones. They're a bit low quality, but you can use them for testing, and then if you want to buy better ones, you can find a lot of different assets on the Unity Asset Store, but these ones are for free, and I provided a link in the description. So we're simply going to select our fish, and we're going to drag one of them to be the source. So this will be a generic fish, it's not going to be any kind of fish. So let's take this one and drag it over here. So you can see that it's a bit pixelated, and that's not the best quality, and that's just because it's really a free asset. Now we can also make the scale a bit smaller. So 0.8, 0.8, and 0.8. And now it may look a bit better. Now that we have this, we also want to add some kind of graphic to the catcher. So we're going to add this border that I have, or maybe a frame. Have this transparent frame, so we're going to use this one. Now also make sure that the fish and the catcher have the default position, so we're going to 0 them to the middle. So both of them start in the middle. And of course, don't change anything else because they need to be in this exact position. Now we're going to create two scripts that are going to control the movement of the fish and the movement of the catcher. So if we go over here, we're going to create a new script and name it fish movement and also catcher movement. We're going to select our fish and drag the fish movement on it. And we're going to select the catcher and drag the catcher movement on this game object. So inside the fish movement script, we want to add a few variables. So we're going to have a public float max left, and it's going to be negative 250. Then we're going to have a public max right, which will be 200. Then we're going to also add a public float max speed, or just speed fish move speed. And this will also be 250. Then we also want to have a public float change frequency, and this will be 0.01. And of course, these are also floats. We also want to have a public float target position. And a public bool moving right. So these will simply limit the movement of the fish. Then the move speed will simply move between both of these points. The change frequency is how long until he actually changes the position, because we want our fish to be unpredictable. We want it to be a bit challenging. So if we set a higher value, for example, 1, it means that every second the fish will change its movement. And it's not something you want to do because he will simply change the position all of the time and he will be stuck in place. That's why you want to have a very low value, so it will take time before he actually changes direction. Of course, you can make it a bit more challenging by increasing this to something like 0.3, and this will simply make it change the direction faster, but still it should be something very low. We're going to keep it at 1. Then we also want to have a reference to the target position, and this is simply where the fish should move next. So in the start, we're going to get our first target position, and we're going to use random range, and we're going to move between max left and max right. So it will simply generate a random number between negative 250 and 250, and then it will select one of these points and it will set it to be the target position. Then inside of the update method, we have the rest of our code. So let me just add it over here. So over here was simply moving the fish towards this first target position, and then we're also checking if it actually reached the target position, and if it reached, then we're simply going to give it a new position. And over here we also want to have this frequency change, this random change, so it will be unpredictable. So now we're done with the fish movement, and next we want to have a look at the catcher movement. Inside, we're also going to have similar variables: public float max left, max right, and move speed. This is just because we want to limit this catcher. Even though the player is the one that is controlling it, we still want it to be inside of these limits so it will not go out of bounds. And we also want to control the move speed. And notice that we have the same values for the move speed because we don't want the catcher to be slower or faster than the fish. Now, of course, this is up to you to fine tune it. Maybe you want the catcher to be a bit faster, and then it will be easier for him to catch the fish. Maybe you want the fish to be faster, but I think that this is a good thing to have it the same value, so 250, and for the fish movement, 250. And the only thing that we're going to change is maybe the move speed of the fish a bit later to have more difficult fish to catch. So we are going to have different difficulty levels for different fish, and then you can increase the speed for these fish. But for now, we're going to deal with these values. So catcher movement. Then we're going to remove the start method, and inside the update method, we're simply going to look for the input. So if we have the input from the player, we're going to call this method the move catcher, and we're going to move the actual catcher based on the move input. So inside So over here, we're getting the movement based on the move speed, the move input, and the direction, which is right. And then we're going to take this movement and we're going to move the catcher to this new position. Then we also want to clamp the position between max left and max right. And this is what I told you, we don't want the catcher to move beyond this box. So over here, we don't want the catcher to go outside of this box. And I set it to 250 because it's something that I already calculated, and this will keep it inside of this box. So both fish and catcher will not go beyond these limits. And of course, after we clamp this, we are going to set the transform, which is this catcher, to the new position. Now at this point, if we run the game, it should already move. So we can see that the fish is moving and it's really unpredictable. It changes the direction once in a while. And as I told you, we can increase the speed to make it a bit more challenging, but I can also press left and right and it will move the catcher, and I simply need to catch the fish. At this point, the player is moving as well because we did not stop the movement of the player. Now, it's up to you if you want to disable the movement of the player so he focuses on this UI, but I found it that it's actually something that we want to have, because when the fishing rod will be inside the water and we move like this to catch the fish, then the player will move as well, and it will create some kind of feeling that you're struggling with the fish. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave it this way, but of course, if you want to stop the movement of the actual player, then you simply need to go to your movement script and add some kind of condition. So for example, if we go to our player, over here we have all of these conditions to the movement. Of course, this is not the best way to do it, but you can simply add another condition and say if fishing system is minigame active, then false, then disable the movement. And then when the minigame will be active, it will simply disable the movement of the player, but then when the minigame is over, then it's going to enable the movement, right? So you can do this. I'm going to leave it this way. I want the player to actually move because it's going to look a bit more realistic. Next, we want to have some kind of brain to the actual minigame. So we don't want to mix it together with the fishing system. We want to have it separately. It will be much cleaner. So we can take our minigame object and we're going to add a new script on it, and we're going to name it fishing minigame. Over here, we're going to have two things. For now, we're going to have the public rec transform fish, transform, and we're going to have our catcher transform. We also want to have a public bool that will let us know if they are overlapping. Next, we want to actually calculate and check if the fish is overlapping. So we're going to add our update method back. And over here, we're going to have an if statement. So we're simply going to have a method that is going to take both transforms and check if they're overlapping, and then it's going to return a boolean. So if this will be true, then the fish's overlapping will be true, but if this will be false, then the fish's overlapping will be false. So inside this method, we need to check if they are overlapping. So we are going to have a bit of calculations over here. So over here, we're simply creating these two transforms. We are getting both of them, so the fish and the catcher transforms, and then we can simply use this overlaps method that will check if they're overlapping, and if they are, it's going to return true, and if they're not, it's going to return false. So we're going to know if they are overlapping. Now that we know if they are overlapping, we need to actually start with the logic for the minigame. So we're going to add a few more variables over here. So these will be some counters and some values for the minigame. We have a reference to the slider. As I told you, when the overlapping will take place, this slider is going to increase. And then when it reaches the top, then we're going to win the minigame. But when it's not overlapping, then it means that we're failing and the slider will go down. And then if it reaches 0, then we're going to fail the minigame. So it will actually have a threshold. 100 will be the success and negative 100 will be fail, and 0 will be the starting point. So we're going to start at 0 and we're going to go up or down. Then we're going to have a success increment. So as long as we're hovering over the fish and it's overlapping, it's going to increase it by 15. But if we're not overlapping, it's going to decrease it by 12. Then we also have the success counter, and this will actually be the value that will make the slider go up or down. Then over here, we want to start the overlapping calculation. And this will be the actual logic of the minigame. So first of all, we check if So over here, we're checking if we are overlapping. And as long as we are overlapping, it's going to increase the success counter by the success increment. But if we are not overlapping, then it's going to decrease the success counter by the fail decrement. Okay? So the slider will always go up or down depending on if we're overlapping. Then we also want to limit the success counter because we don't want him to go above the thresholds. We also update the value of the actual slider. And then we check if the counter has reached one of these thresholds. Because if it reached the success threshold, we should win the minigame. And if it reached the fail threshold, we should lose the minigame. For now, we're going to have these debugs. Later, we're going to add the code inside. Now we want to select our minigame and create a new slider. And I'm going to make it very simple, but of course you can make it look better. So I'm going to rotate this a bit. Not like this, like this. I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to increase it, maybe 5, no, 2, 2, 2. I'm going to move it a bit over here. Then again, you can play around with the style of the slider. You can find custom sliders. I'm just going to keep it simple and leave it up to you. Then over here on the slider, we need to set the minimum value to be -100 because this is the threshold, and the maximum will be 100. Okay, so this is very important. And you can see that the minigame will start when the slider is in the middle, and then it will go up or down depending on the success. Of course, you can also add some logic to maybe change the color of the slider. So if it goes up, it will become green, and if it goes down, it will become red. So it's really up to you, and maybe I'm going to do it later, but for now we're going to keep it simple. Then we're going to select our fishing system, actually the minigame, and we're going to drag the reference for the slider. So fish and catcher. And we can also do something else. Let's say we can add a text. Oh, it's actually the other way around. Doesn't matter. We're going to add a text over here and one at the top. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on designing this, but we can have a fish caught and fish escape text so the player will know which way he should actually aim at. Now, another thing that we need to do is back inside the minigame. We also need to reset the value of the counter and the slider when this is over. Otherwise, it's going to stay this way for the next fish that we try to catch. So over here, when we actually succeeded or failed, before we run the code for adding the fish or for ending the minigame, we also want to say success counter 0 and success slider value also 0, because we want to reset them. And now we can see that it already works. When the fish is inside of the catching area, the slider goes up, but when the fish is outside, then the slider goes down. Now at this point, it's going to be very easy to catch the fish because he is not that fast, but again, you can make it very simple or you can make it a bit more challenging, and later in the next episode, we're going to also add the option to have different levels of difficulty for different fish. So maybe if it's like some kind of rare fish, it's going to be much harder and the fish will be much faster, but for simple fish, it's going to be easier to catch them. So at this point, we can also try to catch the fish, and it's actually kind of challenging. But when we reach the top, we are going to get this print over here inside the console that says success. But at this point, nothing really happens, so we need to add this logic as well. So inside our fishing system, we're going to scroll down to the start struggle method. And over here, I already have this start minigame debug, and we're going to start the minigame. So start minigame, and this will be a method. We're going to generate it. And inside, we're simply going to activate our minigame. So we don't need to start anything inside the minigame. As long as the minigame is active, it's going to start moving and it's going to start working. So first of all, we need a reference to our minigame over here. Public game object minigame. We don't even need to get the script itself. We simply need to get the game object, and then we're going to be able to enable it and disable it. So inside the start minigame, we're simply going to set active to be true. So when we start the minigame, we simply activate the minigame component with the script, and it's going to start doing all of this logic that we created over here. Let's also add a reference inside the fishing system. So we need a reference to the minigame. Let's just drag the minigame over here. Now, if we go over here inside the fishing minigame, we can see that at this point, nothing happens when we reached success or fail. And the logic that we want to add is to basically end the minigame, because it doesn't matter if we succeeded or failed, the minigame should be over. So we simply go into the fishing system instance, and we're going to create a method that we still don't have. It's going to be named end minigame, and it's going to receive a parameter of type boolean. So it will receive true if we succeeded, but it will receive false if we failed. Okay, now we're going to generate this method, and it's going to generate it inside of the fishing system. So we can go to the fishing system, and we are going to look for this method, end minigame. And we can also see this bool over here. Now we can also rename this to success. And the logic that we want to do here is basically to do something if the minigame is ended, but we won, or if we lost. So first of all, we want to set our minigame game object set active to be false, because we want to remove the entire UI of our minigame. And then we want to check what is the bool itself. So if success, then do something, else do something else. But in both cases, we also want to end the fishing itself. So not only the minigame, but the fishing itself, right? Because we are done with the fishing. Now, if we succeeded, we also need to get the fish itself, right? We need to add it into the inventory. But if we failed, there is nothing to do. We simply need to end the fishing. And we already have this method, right? We have it. We are setting everything to false, and we are just resetting the model. So we're ending the fishing. But over here, if it's a success, if we caught a fish, we need to actually add it into the inventory. So we can say debug log fish caught, fish escaped. Okay, and we're going to deal with this logic in the next episode. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, please leave a like, leave a comment if you have some kind of question, and I'll see you in the next episode.